Official howdy, everybody. My name is Sarah Boreen, and I am with Living Well at Texas A&M, the Employee Wellbeing and Engagement Program for staff and faculty. We're so glad you're here today. And we as a team are privileged to have Preston Moore with us today. I've actually worked with Preston's wife, Sarah, on some previous programming. If anybody remembers our coaching circles that we did with Sarah or the pump up session. And then I got connected with Preston and we started planning this program back in the fall. So we've worked hard on it and we're super excited the day is here. For about 2 decades, Preston Moore has been a passionate advocate for mental wellness and addiction education. His approach to normalizing mental health and addiction resources is making a massive impact on our communities, increasing engagement, improving performance, and strengthening relationships. Preston helps organizations and schools reduce stigma, discrimination, and bullying by providing services to emergency crisis teams, hospitals, criminal justice organizations, addiction treatment facilities, universities, Texas A&M, and schools across the country. His mission: to make mental and emotional health care services as common as joining a gym or hiring a personal trainer. A proud husband and father, Preston is dedicated to making a real difference in the lives of those affected by mental health as well as addiction. And fun fact, Preston is originally from Bryan College Station, currently lives in Ohio, and is an Aggie as well. So welcome, Preston. We're super excited to have you here. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the program. So if anybody has any questions, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So feel free to type your questions and I'll be relaying those to Preston during our Q&A. We're so excited y'all are here for this important program. And it's also mental health awareness and suicide awareness, suicide prevention awareness week here at Texas A&M. So we're really excited to be able to bring this program in conjunction with this very important week. So without further ado, here is Preston Moore.
Nice, thank you. Let me know. So as we work through this, can you hear and see me? Sarah?
Yes, I can.
Yes. All right. So for my viewers, one thing that I find that works really well, especially when someone has slides, they're a speaker and they have slides. If you go up to your view and you put speaker side by side or side by side speaker, right, instead of like either gallery or speaker view, you can adjust to make the speaker bigger. That would be me. And then my slides, and make them kind of like equal size, just if you like to pay attention who is actually talking as opposed to looking at a presentation. So that is a small tip. What else? Real quick in the chat, for those of y'all that aren't eating, that are maybe paying attention, what we say, what department are we from? Maybe where are we from? Something interesting to give me some perspective on who's on the screen or in the chat with us. So what department? Human resource, here we go. Where are you from? Why did you show up here? Those are also good. And then as Sarah said, I'm going to try to leave some room at the end for questions, but doing online Zoom presentations, questions are often a coin flip because people don't always ask them. So if you think of a question, put it in the chat. Whenever you think about it, you can put it in the chat and Sarah will track it and help us navigate as we go through. So what up? Yes, it is surreal to me that I've been in Ohio for 5 years. I lived in Philadelphia for 8. I've been out of Texas for 14 years, and I talk all across the nation. And I usually tell them I'm from a small town in Texas where Texas A&M is. And now I'm actually talking to my homies. Alma mater, class of 2008. What's funny is I think I'm so unique and different that I moved out of Texas. I live in Columbus, Ohio, where OSU, Ohio State University is. And I live 4 miles north of campus off of their main street, and their main street goes right through the middle of town, in a neighborhood that looks just like the one that I grew up in Bryan, actually. And I live 2 miles north of Texas A&M campus in a neighborhood that looks just like the one I'm in. So I can leave Texas, but I'm not that unique. Today, we're going to talk about redefining self-care, mental and emotional wellness, and the stigma revolution. Someone in the chat, do me a favor. Let's see how this works. Someone in the chat put, what do you think of when you think of stigma? What does stigma mean? See if you can put it in the chat for me. Stigma. What comes up? Going back. Put it in the chat. What comes to mind when you think of stigma? Stigma. Something that marks you negatively. That's good. Judgment, generalization, negative perception. Absolutely. Negative associations. Now, there's plenty of things that have a stigma attached to them. Often stereotypes, right, can be associated with some sort of stigma. When it comes to mental health and addiction stigma, we talk about a bias or a prejudice, right? This is something that keeps people from seeking services until they're absolutely desperate. Here's what I mean. Most people, whether it's in my relationship, it's in my career, whether it's around my mental and emotional health care, substance and alcohol abuse, most people wait until they are utterly desperate until they become willing to engage in services. And that's part of my mission, which is how can we talk about mental and emotional health care in a way that gets people into prevention instead of waiting for a crisis to happen. So we're going to talk about the current state of mental health, addiction, self-care. We're going to talk about stigma. We're going to talk about a reframe from mental health and addiction to like mental and emotional wellness, or even talk about emotional dysfunction as opposed to diagnosis or diagnosis or mental health and addiction association. Let's see, where are we at? Let me see if I can, there we go, boom. So where are we at currently? Currently, we are in a place where everyone knows we have an issue with mental health and addiction. What I mean by everyone knows, we have suicide awareness days, we have suicide awareness weeks, we've got months, mental health and addiction awareness, we got all kinds of things. We got it all over social media. We've got it. Our politicians are standing up, allocating funds and grants to help with mental health and addiction. If you have Netflix, you've seen a documentary called The Pharmacist, and you've seen on Hulu with Michael Keaton, a drama called Dope Sick, very good, by the way, about, what is that about? The opiate crisis and the Sackler family, what's happened around addiction, opiates, and fentanyl. Our criminal justice system knows we have an issue with mental health and addiction. Our universities, our schools, our community groups, everyone knows that we've got some sort of issue with mental health and addiction, yet nobody knows exactly what to do about it. Or better yet, and you'll have some experience with this working for a large institution like Texas A&M, even if people have opinions or have great strategies for making changes, these big institutions, whether it's university institutions, government and political institutions, our medical or insurance institutions, our criminal justice system, often it takes 10 to 20 years to make a large change, not just for not little changes, but from the time we discover some new practice, whether it's mental health and addiction, medical process, procedure, often it could take 10 to 20 years to make that change until it's part of our normal operating procedure. So the question is, well, what do we do about it? Right? There you go, Andrea, that's right. Dope Sick, the thing on Hulu. What do we do about it? Right? If our school is 5, 10, 15 years away and you have a fifth grader that is struggling with mental and emotional health or behavioral health issues, and that school comes to you and says, hey, Mr. and Miss Smith, we got a great solution for you. It'll be ready in about 8 years, and you have a fifth grader, right? What do we do about that, right? How do we take initiative? And make the changes locally as opposed to waiting for the institutions that we're a part of to change? You heard me talk about emotional dysfunction. Put a 1 in the chat, please. Put a 1 in the chat if you've heard of an author from the 80s and 90s called John Bradshaw. Put a 1 in the chat if you've heard of him. Put a 2 in the chat if you've never heard of John Bradshaw before. 2, never heard. Well, I got one for you. Anybody ever heard of my girl, Brene Brown? Anybody? Put a 1 in the chat if you've heard of Brene Brown. Put a 1 if you love Brene Brown. Yes, Brene is a 4th generation Texan from right down the road. She's a professor at University of Houston. She went to the other school. We won't say who that is. She's homies with Oprah. A lot of her work around shame and vulnerability was built off of what John Bradshaw did in the 80s and 90s. Here's what I love about John Bradshaw. He was a family systems therapist, multiple time New York Times bestseller. If you want a great series to watch on YouTube, it's called John Bradshaw and the Homecoming. And he talks about in detail a lot of the things of what I'm going to tell you about today, which is family dysfunction and the roles that we take on. Meaning, John says our issue is not mental health and addiction, it's emotional dysfunction. And he says it like this. He says, our society is emotionally sick because our families are emotionally sick. And our families are sick because we are living by inherited rules we didn't write. Listen to what I'm saying here, right? Listen to what our boy Johnny B is saying. Our society is emotionally sick because our families are emotionally sick, and our families are sick because we're living by inherited rules we didn't write. Put in the chat, what do you think of? Does anything come to mind when you think of inherited rules or inherited beliefs that were passed down to you from generation to generation that you, A, may still agree with, or B, go, I'm not sure I agree with that anymore? Eating disorders, keep going. What do we think of? Inherited rules. Now, for those of y'all that like to read the screen, I got a couple of cheats on there for you of what I'm talking about. Let's see. I like that one. Do as I say, not as I do. Oh my goodness. Women are inferior, religion. Now, here's what I like about John Bradshaw's perspective on emotional dysfunction. Here is part of the reason, right? Here's part of the reason I feel, this is my opinion, why we're not further along when it comes to mental health and addiction services or prevention. When I say mental health and addiction, people do one of 2 things, right? Almost everyone knows someone that has, addiction issue or mental health issue. They instantly think, oh, my cousin, my son, my neighbor, my uncle, right? But one of 2 things happen. Either you identify with mental health or addiction and you go, yeah, me, we need to do this, right? Now, you don't tell anybody that per se, but when we talk about mental health and addiction, they go, yes, I identify with it. Yes, we need help. Now, the rest of our population, the rest of our community goes, oh, such an important topic. Sarah, I'm so grateful y'all are doing mental health and suicide awareness week. Oh, that's so good for them. Those people with the big real problems, right? There's this disassociation that happens with the vast majority of our community members. Not that they don't have empathy and sympathy for people that struggle. It's they don't identify with it, which means it's important, but there's no action. Are you with me? Right? So when we go back, when I talk about mental health and addiction, about 80 to 90% of the room doesn't identify with it, right? So 80 to 90% of the room separates themselves from it, which is why what John Bradshaw and Virginia Satir talked about is 96% of families, they would always say John Bradshaw said this, but he was very quick to point out it's Virginia's quote, 96% of families are in one way, shape, or another emotionally impaired or emotionally dysfunctional. Now, to be clear, some of these numbers are really high because they were in the 80s and 90s. Now they've kind of brought those down more to like 60s and 70s, but I want to be very clear. Everyone, and I mean everyone, falls in the scale somewhere around dysfunctionally managing their emotions. What I mean by that is you might be dysfunctional at like a 3 or 4. I might be dysfunctional at like a 9, 10 plus, but we've both got it in some way, shape, or form. You might be better in one area. I might be better at another one, but a lot more people can identify with emotional impairment or emotional dysfunction than they can mental health and addiction. That's why I like talking about mental and emotional fitness, mental and emotional health care, emotional dysfunction. Now, when we talk about inherited rules we never wrote, these are things like what happens in this house stays in this house. How many? Put a 1 in the chat if you've ever heard that before. What happens in this house stays in this house, right? That, my friends, there's things that need to be private, but that's also a microcosm of I am a different person in public than I am at home. What happens in this house stays in this house, right? We show up to work, we show up to functions, we show up to school, we show up to religious organizations. Everything is clean and pressed and starched, right? Smile is on, never knowing that if you found out what was going on in the house before church, if you found out what granny and granddad did, right, we would be embarrassed, ashamed, the police might be called, right? This is living a double life. Often perfectionism or performance culture is associated with this. What about don't be too full of yourself? Someone said women are inferior. Women don't talk like that. Ladies don't dress like that. Men don't cry, right? Who you are isn't good enough. One of the things that two things that I want to point out on here: don't trust, don't feel. Now, family, before I get too far, let me be very, very clear. He said those rules are lame. Let me be clear. When I talk about family, when I talk about generational trauma, when I talk about childhood, I want to be very clear. I'll talk about me. My family did a lot of things right? They were married until my dad passed away 20 years ago. They were both business owners. They taught me not to lie, cheat, and steal. They took care of us. They did a lot of things right. But when we're talking about belief systems passed down from generation, for example, quit crying before I give you something to cry about, right? My mother was raised in a religious children's home. They believed, maybe y'all could finish this sentence. Let's see if someone can finish this sentence. Spare the rod. What comes next? Spare the rod. There it is. I think we might be related. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So when an adult says, quit crying before I give you something to cry about, let's break that down. So imagine a child, right? 4, 5, 6 years old, having a big emotion. At 4, 5, 6 year old, your brain is not fully developed in the sense of how adults are. A child is throwing a fit. Many adults, myself included, might look at that fit as disrespectful, being spoiled, not listening, right? Being out of control, right? So imagine a child, big emotions, their caregiver, the person that feeds them, clothes them, and loves them, says, quit feeling before I hurt you. And why do I hurt you? Anybody know? Say, quit feeling before I hurt you. Put it in the chat. Why do I hurt you? I do this because Parker says, scared. What? Miss Lisa said it. Because I love you. Right? I'm talking about dysfunctional rules, dysfunctional ways of handling my emotions that start as a little bitty child, parents doing the best they can with what they had, doing what they believe is right. I remember my mother's that tension I knew she had as a mother, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child. You can't let them get too far in line. You got to have discipline. But I knew it was grinding at her because she didn't like doing it, right? I was confused. Quit feeling before I hurt you, and I hurt you because I love you, which develops a perception of don't trust, don't feel. For me, it was my feelings are dangerous. If I have too many big emotions, they're dangerous. I might get in trouble. I'm in trouble and I don't actually know it. And I can't trust either them, the caregivers, whoever, and I can't trust me, right? This is just a microcosm of example. And many different friends and family members have different variations of this same thing, but the roots are the same, which is I can't trust myself. My feelings are not safe. Let's look at what's next. Let's talk about feelings, right? Now, this is going to be a fun one. I asked who loves Brene Brown. Put a 1 in the chat if you have read or heard about Brene Brown's last book called The Atlas of the Heart. Put a 1 in the chat if you've heard of The Atlas of the Heart. Put a 2 if you have not. If you've read it, put a 1. If you've read it. This is a big book. There we go. Tiffany's read it. Nora's read it. So here's what's interesting. So John Bradshaw says, our society is sick because our families are sick, and our families are sick because we're living by inherited rules we didn't write. He says he thinks everybody is emotional dysfunctional in some way, shape, or form. This is 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, surprise. In Brene Brown's book, she says we should be able to identify and communicate. Put it in the chat for me. She says we should be able to identify and communicate how many feelings. So not only should we be able to identify them, but we should be able to communicate them in the moment. Anybody want to guess? How many feelings should we be able to identify and communicate in the moment? That means when it's happening. How many? Michael's got 130. Who else? Any other guesses? 1? More than 1? Brene Brown says we should be able to identify and communicate 87 emotions. There it is. There's Nora. 87 emotions. Can you imagine? So here I am. Let's talk about me. Here I am. I don't trust my feelings, right? What I've done is kind of stuffed. I've done this because I've done a lot of work over the years. I've stuffed my emotions down. I have a hard time identifying my emotions. And my girl Brene is telling me I should be able to identify and communicate when all the chaos is going on, when my emotions running rampant. I should be able to identify and communicate 87 emotions. Based on her research, how many emotions can the average American identify and communicate? In the chat, what's the average number of emotions the average person can identify and communicate? 5, close. I'll get close. The answer is 3. Happy, sad, and pissed off. We can't even label it, right? Happy, sad, and pissed off, which is the issue. Again, I am not talking about mental health and addiction. I'm talking about how do I identify, handle my emotions in a responsible and productive way, and don't cause a wake of dysfunction for my kids, grandkids, or even up the line to my parents and grandparents. So let's talk about anger, right? I'm going to give you some real life examples about anger and my history with anger. So for me, for a very long time, a very large portion of my life, I have had a dysfunctional relationship with anger, right? Anger to me is scary. It's unpredictable. It's immature, right? It is irresponsible. It creates a lot of uncertainty around me. I don't like being around angry people, right? It creates a knot in my gut. If you ask me, Preston, do you feel angry? I'd say absolutely not. I don't get angry. I'm a good boy. I don't lose my patience. Now, I might call it I'm frustrated. I might call it I'm annoyed. I might call it maybe I have some angst going on, but I sure as heck wouldn't call it anger, right? Now, you may be thinking, well, Preston, I'm okay with anger, right? As a matter of fact, anger has served me well. That I've found that if I get angry, not only can I protect myself, but I can protect my family and my loved ones. I can keep people at a distance if I can get angry. Now, one of the support groups that should be way more popular, it's called ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Family Dysfunction. They talk about some of the symptoms are the inner drugstore, right? So just like the alcoholic can get addicted to alcohol, in the ACA, they talk about the inner drugstore, which means We can be addicted to sadness. We can be addicted to grief. We can be addicted to anger. We can be addicted to chaos and excitement. And so a lot of times with anger or sadness or stress, we can get addicted to that cortisol adrenaline cycle. What I mean by that is cortisol happens when we get stressed. We get stressed, we feel pressure, we feel scared. The adrenaline kicks in to handle it, right? So I can get high on anger. I can also get high on feeling sorry for myself. Another thing about anger is I could have righteous anger, right? For me, righteous anger was a little bit okay. Righteous anger means, you ever get on, watch the news or get on social media and look at something that the like other political party is saying, right? And I can get angry. I can feel righteous in my anger. And then I call my friends and my family who agree with me, and we can be righteously angry together. And boy, does it feel good, right? Now, those are two different types of anger. Avoid anger like I was. Maybe you like anger, right? Or maybe you're okay with anger. Anger is a part of your culture. Some of you are thinking, well, we didn't have any of that in my family. Like my parents never fought. I didn't really see anger. Everything was fine. Anybody grow up in a family like that? Everything's fine. Granny just died. Everything's fine. We're good. We brush it under the rug. Some people wish their family would show some emotion, right? So we've got a couple different variations of anger. For me, I didn't identify with it. So what happened was, something that I forgot to mention, so all of this information, the vast majority of this information comes from personal experience. What I mean by that is I didn't go to college to get a degree in counseling or therapy or mental health and addiction. I don't have any letters behind my name, but I do have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours participating and experimenting with the things that I'm talking to you about. I also work for a mental health and addiction hospital, and I travel across the country talking about prevention, awareness, stigma, crisis intervention, etc. But growing up, I had a small problem, is that I got arrested a lot. I got my first DWI my senior year in high school. That was right there in Bryan, Texas. 2 years later, I got a drug possession. A year after that, another DWI. 4 months after that, another drug possession. I got thrust. I got forced. I got manipulated into going to treatment because I was on the verge of going to jail. And the last time I used any drugs or alcohol was September 10th of 2001, the day before 9/11. So I've been on a path of recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, but also self-discovery, personal development. And I've expanded in all kind of different personal development modalities to grow spiritually, emotionally, and to not pass the mess down to my family. So that's where a lot of this comes from. So the first person that helped me out in this area around anger was put one in the chat if you ever heard this before. He said that anger is a secondary emotion. Has anybody put a one in the chat if you've ever heard that before? Anger is a secondary emotion, right? So here's what he meant by that. He said, often when we feel angry, there's a lot of people that, remember, happy, sad, pissed off. A lot of people can get angry real quickly, right? Now, it feels chaotic. It feels out of the blue. It feels unmanageable, but they can still get angry. Martha hit the nail on the head, which he said that anger is often rooted in fear. Either I'm scared I'm not going to get what I want, or I'm scared that I'm going to lose what I have, right? Scared I'm not going to get what I want, or scared I'm going to lose what I have. I typically don't recognize the fear, so I get angry, right? Think back to the example of getting online and looking at people that disagree with you politically, or disagree with you religiously, or disagree with the way you view school, or disagree with you in one way, shape, or form. And if you think of, if that political party gets elected, I'm going to lose X. If that party gets elected, we're not going to get, right? You name it. So that worked for me in the beginning. Actually, it worked for a very long time, that I was way more comfortable identifying the fear and not the anger. And that worked for a very, very long time until it didn't work anymore. And what happened was, as I got older, Brene Brown talks about many people have midlife crisis somewhere in their 40s and 50s. Right. She said it's very common that somewhere in their 40s and 50s is when people have a midlife crisis. And she says it's because the weight of the protective coat, the protective cape that we're going to do. I'm going to handle it all. Everybody's needs comes ahead of mine. I'm one way in public and then I can go home and take the cape off. The weight of pretending and being and taking care of everybody else, or having all these emotions and not knowing what's going on, the weight gets too much. I drop it. I must do something about it because I can't pretend anymore. So what happened for me was I've been with my wife for 18 years. My son, he'll be 8 on Friday. But a couple of years ago, I found that I started losing my temper, right? Which was very uncharacteristic for me because remember, I stuffed my feelings. I didn't want to feel. And so I found myself starting to lose my temper, acting out of character. I started scaring the crap out of my wife and my son, right? I knew something was going on because I had enough tools and skills, right? I started looking for something new to figure out what is going on with me. So I went to a therapist. He was an IFS therapist. Someone put it in the chat if they know what IFS therapy stands for. IFS. The guy that founded IFS therapy, his name is, there you go. Aaron knows what's up. IFS therapy. The guy that founded IFS therapy was Richard Schultz. There's a great book called Self Therapy written by, I think it's Tony Early. But the premise is that our family systems, much like John Bradshaw, our family system is like our immediate family, extended family, mom, dad, cousin, wife, all that fun stuff. Internal family systems, and this is a very basic explanation, internal family systems is me at different stages of my life. So for example, there's a 6-year-old me, right? He's part of the family. There's a 12-year-old me. This is how he behaves and how he sees the world. He's part of my family. There's the rebellious teen. There's the responsible adult good boy, right? There's all these different parts of me from different stages in my life, and they are my internal family. And so I go to this therapist and I say, I'm having a problem with anger. And he says, well, tell me about it. When's the first time you remember being angry or experiencing angry, right? Experiencing anger, right? And it's very kind of meditative and visualization, that kind of thing. And I go back and I remember hiding under my bed, ages 4, 5, 6, somewhere in there, hiding under my bed because my parents were outside in the hallway yelling at each other. Now, I want to be clear. This was not a domestic violence issue. This was stress and pressure of having a family and being married and kids and businesses, right? They were yelling at each other. I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. As a matter of fact, like most kids, I think it's my fault. Like maybe I did something wrong. I decided in that moment that anger was dangerous. Not only did I not want to feel it, but I didn't want to scare anybody else like they did. So I decided that I was going to do everything I can not to feel anger. So my solution was I'm going to be liked. I'm going to put everybody else's needs above mine. I have no needs. I'm going to do whatever you need me to do. If you are an angry or kind of a volatile person, either I didn't want to hang out with you or I became your friend because that became a protection mechanism for me. I was a chameleon. I can fit into all these different types of groups. And I also started medicating with alcohol and other drugs, right? That if I would use some sort of outside substance, that little knot in my gut would go away, right? That was developed at the age 4, 5, 6 years old. And so when I'm talking to people about mental health and addiction, or about relationships, long-term committed relationships, or about parenting, or I'm in a men's group and someone's sharing, if we just look at the symptom, procrastination, symptom, overthinking, symptom, anxiety and depression, often it is a symptom of something deeper. Sometimes anger is a symptom. If we don't do the work to get deep into the roots, it's quite possible that we're focused on the wrong thing. One of my mentors would say, if I give you half the story, He can't give me a solution. He can't help me with the solution because we're only working with half our cards. That, my friends, is an example of the importance of mental and emotional fitness. What are we doing? What are we doing to help understand ourselves, help identify how we feel, learn new ways to navigate those feelings, look back into our family history or our childhood and see what are those things that are affecting me that either I'm hiding from you, I'm repressing, I've stuffed them down, I don't even know they're there, or I deny that they're a part of it. How do we get people to start looking at that as opposed to what many people do, which is look for shortcuts, checklists, and sometimes medication? Let's see. Remember, if anybody's got questions, make sure to put them in the chat and we'll address them. We'll address them at the end. I don't have a ton of time to go through this. This is one of my favorite topics. The John Bradshaw series goes through this, but this is talking about the 6 forms of dysfunctional families that mirror, and hear what I'm saying. I do a lot of recovery workshops, and we talk about growing up in an alcoholic or drug addicted home, and everybody agrees that that's not a good thing. But if you take a picture or a screenshot of this, these family types are exact mirrors to what it's like growing up in an alcoholic home. Here's what I mean. The vast majority of people would agree if someone grows up in an alcoholic or drug addicted home or neighborhood, it is not a good thing. But these same perfectionistic, overly strict, militaristic, foster care, adoption, and divorce, a lot of people don't like talking about that, mental or emotional health in the home. They create the same feelings of shame and guilt, low self-esteem. Do I matter? Am I lovable? Am I the same exact feelings and emotions of an alcoholic home? And many people think that because alcohol and drugs aren't prevalent, or mental health, extreme mental health isn't prevalent in the home, that they don't have anything in common with some of the other people that we're talking about. That's why I don't like talking about mental health and addiction. I like talking about family dysfunction, emotional dysfunction, mental and emotional fitness. Now, what does that look like? What might a mental wellness plan look like? Now, this is one of the biggest challenges that we have facing the personal development or self-discovery industry or wellness industry, right? Aside from people rolling their eyes as if maybe they don't identify with it, or the people that like it are involved in it. How can we carry a message to make change? There is nothing you are good at. Hear what I'm saying. There is nothing you are good at that you didn't spend hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours getting good at it, right? Nothing you are good at that you didn't spend hundreds, even thousands of hours getting good at it, right? You can't go to McDonald's and get a job without doing 40, 80, 120 hours of training. You cannot get good at a language. You cannot be good at parenting. You can't learn to be in a relationship without hundreds and thousands of hours of practice. But if I came to you, put it in the chat for me. If I came to you and I said, I want to work out, be like, all right, Sarah, Michael, I want to work out and lose some weight, and I'm going to practice. I'm going to work out 2 to 4 times a month. How do you think I would do? I want to lose weight, and I'm going to work out 2 to 4 times a month. What would you tell me? But Jessica, I'm going to eat right. I'm going to do no sugar and no pasta. I'm going to do that twice a month, right? What's the point? Why start? You say, well, that's good, but nothing's going to work. The average person that is willing to see a coach, a counselor, a therapist, or support group, the average person sees a coach, a counselor, a therapist 1 to 2 times a month, right? How are we going to change generations, a lifetime, years of seeing things a certain way, believe in a certain way, handle my emotions a certain way, and we're going to practice 1 to 2 hours a month, right? We must shift our perspective about mental and emotional health care, not from, you don't need to be in a counselor or therapist. Some of y'all won't ever need a counselor or therapist, but you can't be and see a counselor or therapist more than once a week. So what do you do with the rest of your time, right? How can we build out a mental wellness plan that we can get our hours up enough where it's more of a lifestyle as opposed to I'm going to go to a counselor to try to save my marriage, but we're only going to do 2 hours a month. It's just not feasible. I don't have enough time to go into this in detail, but this is what's called a level of care education. If you notice at the bottom, it says level 1, level 2, and then there's a 3, 4, 5. I work in the field of 3, 4, 5. This is drug addiction treatment, mental health stabilization, a hospital, someone's homicidal, suicidal, hearing stuff, seeing stuff, the extreme stuff. 80 to 90% of our population will never need more than a coach, a counselor, a therapist, maybe some psychology. But why do you think I have support groups circled? Any ideas? Put it in the chat. Why do you think I have support groups circled? Or said another way, why am I biased towards support groups? Availability, easy access, community is key, right? Most people don't know this, but a large portion of mental health and addiction services are not covered by insurance. Let me be more specific. For many insurance programs, counseling often isn't covered. Maybe if it's covered, there could be a copay. Often marriage and couples counseling, not covered. Family counseling, not covered, right? So if family is the heart of the home, and to have a successful child or community is that we have families together, but family counseling or couples counseling is not covered by insurance, that could get very, very expensive. What if you have a family of 4? We're all going to go to counseling, right? It's $100 a piece. It's $50 a piece. That could very easily become a mortgage payment. You can't do it forever. Support groups are free. They're often peer-led. A lot of y'all had hit the nail on the head about being social, right? The Attorney General, this is a great podcast, the Rich Roll podcast. The Attorney General was interviewed, and he says, not the Attorney General. Is it the Attorney General? I'm starting to question myself. I think it's the Attorney General, the guy responsible for the health of our population. If a virus is coming, he's supposed to see it. Surgeon General, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Someone knows what's going on. The Surgeon General, that's the medical side. Attorney, we're going to put you in jail. Surgeon General. He says, Rich Roll says, what is the thing you're worried about the most for our future generations, currently and future? It's not heart disease. It's not diabetes. It's not cancer. It's isolation. It's isolation. It's not isolation depression. Now I'm starting to second guess myself. Disconnection and isolation, right? That we are connected. The fact that I can give you a workshop from Ohio is awesome. The fact that I can connect with thousands of friends, there it is, isolation and loneliness, right? The fact that I can connect with thousands of friends virtually gives me the false perception that I'm connected, but I am losing my community. Religious organizations are often shrinking. My contribution to community service organizations are shrinking. Our houses are getting bigger and our families are getting smaller. Support groups are a way that I can build community with peers, and I can talk about things that I'm struggling with, right? Without judgment. Now, this is I want to be very clear. Some support groups can be a shame circle, right? This book says, if you do this, you're bad. We go in and we say what we've been doing and we get shamed out of the room and we don't come back. Support groups are so valuable because when I'm in my house, lonely, isolated, depressed, struggling in my marriage, and I think I'm the only one, the last thing I want to do is tell anybody. Support groups are free, they're nationwide, and it's often a support group of people that have experienced, been where I've been, going where I'm going, and I can get help. And it also gives me an opportunity to pay it forward, which means I have a mentor that's helping me with more experience, and I'm helping the new person, which reinforces the work that I'm doing. I love that topic. That's called level of care education. This right here, this is an example of what a wellness plan might look like, just like a workout plan. If you work out regularly, you add up how much time you spend working out, eating right, shopping, going to group fitness classes, hiring a professional, accountability partners. Most people are spending 5 to 15 hours doing that. Well, what if we applied the same thing to our mental and emotional health care? What if we looked at it not as mental health and addiction, not as prevention, we looked at it as mental and emotional fitness? This is an example, and I am biased because a lot of my personal development and growth started in 12-step groups, AA, NA, CA, Al-Anon family groups, NAMI. Those are 12-step support groups. But this is part of a structure of how you build up community and action to start identifying my emotions, learning to navigate my relationships on a regular basis. And I don't do it like some of y'all do church. You show up at church on one day, you do your thing, you hear something good, you feel good, and we don't see you again for another week or two, right? If I want to change the trajectory of where my family's going and how I deal with my emotions, someone has to step up and deal with it, or we're going to kick it down the road for our kids and grandkids to deal with it. Let's see. Last thing, you could take a picture, a screenshot of this. These are just a couple quick resources, and I'll open it up for questions if anybody has anything. These are books. These are I call them alternative resources. When we talk about Caroline Leaf, such a good book. Cleaning Up the Mental Mess in 60 Days. That's amazing. John Bradshaw's workshop on YouTube is there. Breath work and cold plunges. Joe Dispenza talks about long form meditations, 12-step support groups, and all different variations. This is one thing I'll say about support groups. I think one of the challenges around support groups are, one, they're free. Sometimes if they're free, people think that they might not be that good. Also, they're volunteer and peer led. So sometimes they can be a little bit weird. Celebrate, yes. Celebrate is more of a spiritual based. But sometimes it can be a little bit weird. Also, when I'm going to look at some part of my life or some behavior, or I'm struggling, most people, even if you're willing to step foot in that room or step foot on that virtual Zoom call or listen to that phone call, you have the willingness to show up, but everything in your body says, I don't belong here. You are not like them. They're worse than you. What are you doing? Right? I'm not like them. I'm different, right? I'm looking for all the differences. And one of the best advice that people gave me when I started doing this stuff was, one, look for the similarities, not the difference. And you have to go long enough. Hear what I'm saying? You have to go long enough, right? You have to do it enough times to get over the hump of, holy smokes, I am just like them. Oh my goodness, their skin color is different than mine. Their religious beliefs are different than mine. The drugs they use were different than mine. They're old, like in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? That's what I thought. I was 21 years old when I started. I was so different than them. But after a while, because I had to go, after a while, I realized I'm actually more like them than I am my family, right? And so getting over the hump, whether you're going for yourself or a family, is one of the number one recommendations. Is you got to go long enough to get over the hump before you decide if it's for you or it's not. And then one of my last favorite resources, where is it? Turn, go. Oh, that was it. Darn, where's the other one? Oh, it's my wife's book, but now it's not here. Anyway, okay. Now do we have any questions? Do we have any comments? Do we have anything to add? Sarah, do you see anything that came up? Do you think that would be worth covering?
Yes, Preston.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there we go. Full of
real quick. Okay, real quick. There's all my stuff. I got a podcast, High Cost Anonymity. I speak all across the nation. If you think a workshop like this or an expansion on some of the topics I covered, but more importantly, my wife, my lovely wife, also known as my boss, she wrote a book. It's 75 short stories about perfectionism, overthinking, building confidence, self-doubt. She's been a person in family recovery. So AA is for the alcoholic. Al-Anon is for family recovery. She coaches people at Google and Facebook and American Express. And funny thing is, no matter how successful people are, they struggle with the same exact thing. Do I matter? Am I worthy? Am I good enough? Etc. So full of herself. It's an amazing book, especially for you ladies. And tell her best salesperson recommended it. That's me. Thank you. All right. There we go, Sarah.